morning, depending on where you are listening and watching from, and welcome to this week's Horizon X, How to Achieve Personal Transformation. And I would like to start off by welcoming my guests today, Joanne and Damien, into the mix here. So let's give you both a chance to introduce yourselves. So Joanne, why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Charles. Yes, Joanne Merrick. I'm the founder of the Leadership Recipe. We're a learning and development consulting organization. I bring to the table about 25 plus years of leadership and learning and development experience. I've worked at some amazing companies like Amazon, Deloitte, Juniper Networks, where, of course, I met Charles, amongst others. So, a real pleasure to be with you this evening. My time. I'm in the US. So, hi, everyone.
And thanks for taking the night shift.
My pleasure.
And yeah, thanks so much. Okay, Damien, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks for inviting me to join you. So, my background is unusual. I'm a former monk turned management consultant, followed by 24 years in executive recruitment and talent strategy. And I recently set up Talent Diagnostic Solutions, so looking at people strategy of an organization. And I've also had about 18 years of coaching and leadership experience as well along that time. So it's really good to be here today. And I'm currently in the UK, but I used to live in Hong Kong, where I met you many years ago at Juniper Networks.
That's right, exactly. And thank you for taking the morning shift. And I've got the
Indeed,
easy
my
one out,
pleasure.
and I'm taking the midday shift. It is an absolutely beautiful day here in Hong Kong, and I wish that I could actually detach all the wires and show you the view that I'm currently looking at. It's absolutely unbelievably spectacular. Another day we will try to make that happen. We've got a couple of people joining us here, but the comments are not yet coming in. So, oh, here we have Donald. Excited to be here with Joanne. Great to see you, Donald. Thanks so much also for joining us. It's always a valuable experience having you, Donald, here. So thank you for joining us. And I think Renee is on there as well. Mike Smith is here. Great to see you, Mike. Thanks for joining us. And let's get rocking. So today we're talking about personal transformation, and that there's access that people a lot of people might think that getting access to personal transformation is a huge amount of work and a lot of hard work, and that is true. There are ways to go through and achieve major transformation. But today what we're going to talk about is, in addition to some of the ideas around how to create major transformation, we're going to talk about how you can start taking steps towards little bits of transformation. And to begin with that, I have a few opening slides here that I'm going to go through. And Damien and Joanne, please feel free to jump in and interrupt me at any point. Well, not interrupt me, contribute to the discussion at any point as I go through these slides here that I want to share. So the first thing is we have this concept of the iceberg model, and let me put this on a big slide here so people can see. There are many different versions of the iceberg model, but basically what the iceberg model tells us is that everything above the water are things that we know about, and everything below the water are things that typically people don't know about. And as you go further down into the iceberg, deeper into the water, you get into social norms, social values, people's perception, culture, and the actual paradigm that people live in. For example, is the world flat or is the world round? It is one paradigm. And actually, if you study history and look at the time period when it was discovered that the world was round, and there may be some conspiracists out there that are immediately going to comment and say, no, it's flat, that's fine. But when it was generally accepted that the world was flat, that it was round, moving from a flat paradigm to a round paradigm, it was really discombobulating for a lot of people. If you actually look at that time period, there was a lot of well-being issues, a lot of self-harm happening, to put it lightly. So this is the iceberg model. And what in our world, communication happens in the foreground above the water. We have skills, knowledge, attitudes, things that we generally know about ourselves, but interpretation typically happens in the background below the water. The interpretation comes from our perspective, it comes from our social norms, our social values. And you'll see here on the left what people know that they know, what they know that they don't know, and what they don't know that they don't know. So a lot of people will understand that they have a certain perspective of the world. That's something that they don't know, or they may know that they know. That's why it's close to the waterline here. But then as they go down further into perceptions, culture, and paradigm, they may be less aware of that. And let me move on. Anything, Joanne or Damien, you want to add to the iceberg model?
I think this is just a model that explains so much in a visual image. One thing that I always think of when I look at the iceberg model is often I find that we judge other people not on what we're seeing, but our interpretation of what we think we are seeing. So we're kind of judging people on the background piece rather than on the foreground piece. And
Yes.
that's where I think people need to get curious about the impacts that our behaviors might be interpreted, their backgrounds.
Excellent. Now, your audio cut out there a little bit, Joanne, which I think was on my side, but I know that everything coming out of your mouth is gold, so I'm gonna say thank you, and we're gonna keep going. Okay, very good. Let's move on to the next slide here. And numbers 3. So here's where one of the ways to look at all things that there are to know are sort of what's the body of all possible knowledge and what's people's awareness of what there is to know. And there's many different ways you can slice up this pie as well. It could be everything that you know, or it could be everything there is to know about creating results and so on. But one of the ways to look at this model is that there's things that you know, and there's things that you realize you don't know, and there's things you realize you do know, and then there's the things that you don't know that you don't know. And the things that people don't know that they don't know is the yellow piece, the little Pac-Man here. And it's when people are able to unveil what they know that they don't know that usually personal transformation starts to come about. Here in the little yellow Pac-Man. So that's where a lot of personal transformation happens, when people are able to unearth what's going on in the yellow piece of the pie, which is the bigger piece of the pie. And that's the tips that we're going to talk about today, whether they're minor or major surgery types of tips, are the things that will help people to identify things that might be living in what they don't know that they don't know. So let's move on to the next slide here. And this slide, typically people go through life expecting an incremental results. So they'll read a book and they'll get an increase in results. They will go to a course and they'll get an increase in results. They will do, things that we all know are designed to improve life, and you get an incremental increase in results. But we are not most people, and we know that the people watching are not most people. What we want to do is you want to create a breakthrough. And a breakthrough happens when, you see the question mark here, a breakthrough happens when you have some kind of insight, some sort of disruptive thinking, you have some significant change in the paradigm or the worldview, which creates a massive increase, or creates an opening for action, which creates the increase in results. And that's what we call breakthrough thinking. And in the lines here on the right-hand side of the question mark, we have the zone of the unknown, the ambiguous, and the scary. So quite often, when people are in that zone, they're outside of their comfort zone. So creating personal transformation often pushes people outside of their comfort zone. In fact, I would say 99% of the time, it pushes people outside of their comfort zone. And below that incremental line, you've got the zone of the known, predictable, and the controllable. And then the red line takes you up into the breakthrough results that people are achieving. So Damien and Joanne, anything you want to contribute of this slide or the last couple of slides?
I think on this slide itself, I think it's very interesting how sometimes somebody can make what appears to be a very small change, but if it's aligned with a massive shift in their thinking and removing a big obstacle from their life, it can make a significant difference towards breakthrough. So I really like it.
I love that too. Joanne, anything for you?
I think get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Like recognize discomfort as change and movement and transformation rather than discomfort or being uncomfortable. It's all how you think about it.
Great feedback. Great feedback. Thank you. Now I have another version of this slide, which I use a little more often to help people think differently about achieving a breakthrough. And the same thing, you can see here, we've got results on the left axis, time on the bottom, and predictable growth and improvement are expected in today's environment. Companies will follow a best value model. They'll have competitive pricing. The customer's number one. They want to be technology enabled, et cetera, et cetera. In today's business world, I would assert that the new can be disruptive thinking. And even if you look at the fashion industry used to have 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, winter. Now the fashion industry has 365-day seasons. And major retailers are tracking on a daily basis what's popular, what's in, what's hot, what's not. Even to the point where, using the Internet of Things, they will have electronic devices embedded on articles of clothing. So if somebody at Zara picks up a coat and they walk around the shop with that coat, they're able to track the movement of that coat, and then suddenly the coat doesn't get purchased, and they will be able to identify, okay, where in the store did the person put that quote down or that coat down? They put the coat down by the handbags, and the handbag actually ended up being purchased. And then before the item leaves the store, that electronic device is taken off. And they track all this stuff daily on literally a 24/7 basis. And that's an example of the application of disruptive thinking in commercial sector, and how people are just looking at things very, very, very different, and that's able to create breakthroughs for organizations. Now that sort of approach to retail is now becoming commoditized because now everybody's doing it. But the first time the first company was doing it, they had a huge competitive advantage over other organizations. So the same is true in our personal lives. We can go for incremental results, or we can create a sudden, unexpected increase in results through disruptive breakthrough thinking. So anything to add on the last slide, Joanne and Damien? I think we may have covered that from the last 2 slides.
I think so, yes. I think a lot of people are making small changes in their life and don't see that breakthrough. But then the incremental result of that does lead to a significant breakthrough later. So that can certainly happen.
Great. So let's move on then. We have a couple of tips here just to get people started, and then we'll start getting into some sharing from Joanne and Damien on their own personal situations and what they've experienced in their careers. So number 1 tip to start personal transformation is self-reflection and vision. So you want to sit down and reflect on your life, define your why, clearly articulate the specific changes you want and the deeper purpose behind them, and what kind of person do you want to become. And you can even look back, we've had previous conversations about the top 10 most dangerous questions that you could ask yourself. You could sit down and go back to that LinkedIn Live or the newsletter that came out after that LinkedIn Live and take each one of those questions. Maybe 2 or 3 came from me and 2 or 3 from Joanne and 2 or 3 from Damien, and David Wolverton also joined us and there were 2 or 3 from him. You could go through each one of those questions and apply that to this question here, self-reflection and vision. And that's going to be a pretty powerful exercise. Then the next tip number 2 is current status. So do an inventory of your degree of happiness and be really honest about what needs to change. One of the things that I often do with clients is a wheel of life, which looks at typically 6 to 8 categories in an individual's life. So it'll look at their career, it will look at their relationships, it'll look at family, it'll look at finance, it'll look at physical health, it'll look at love, it'll look at spirituality. And people rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 typically, and they're able to see if there's areas of their life that are flat, and then what actions do they want to take to round out a flat wheel. That's one of the approaches that people can take. And another is to trust your instincts to point you in the direction that you want to change, and then take action that symbolizes starting a personal transformation. And on that note of taking action, one area where you can take action is physical commitment. So start with a minor non-negotiable commitment. So if you're not physically active at the moment, then start with something like a daily walk. You don't have to run a marathon. You don't have to start going crazy at the gym, but go for a daily walk and focus on building consistency on that daily walk. One of the things that's really interesting, there is an executive coach that's out there. It's that what I've heard actually is that this particular individual, I won't name them at the moment, but they are a top name in the motivational industry. That person charges, last time I checked, $300,000 per hour. Yes, that is $300,000 per hour. And the first thing they do is physical transformation when they are coaching their executives. And these would be coaching executives, probably of the Fortune 100 companies. And they say to them that in the next 6 months, you'll be in the best physical condition of your life. And they know that a commitment to physical activity and getting healthy will immediately create personal transformation for people. And that would be one thing for people to think about, is just start moving more than you move. And if you do currently walk, then try something else like swimming or rowing. So mix it up a little bit to change things around. And then number 4, elimination, quitting a habit, such as drinking. Now, I could say that the jury's out on the healthy aspects of drinking, but more and more surveys are coming out that talk about how drinking is unhealthy. And then there's other surveys that say, well, having a glass of red wine can be very, very therapeutic for people because it's relaxing, there's fellowship involved, and so on. But one area is looking at habits in your life that might not contribute to being the best version of yourself, and then quit that habit and see what happens. Or quit for a certain amount of time and see what happens after a few months. Or you could also commit to a major clean out. So I just recently moved flats in Hong Kong. In fact, if you listened to Joanne and I last week, I shared about how Tess and I moved apartments in the middle of a typhoon. And at one point it was still a T8, and we had items to put into storage. And just to make things easier for the next day when the T came, which is on the 5th floor of an industrial complex there, it was the only building open in the whole block. And the security guard said to us, "We've turned off the lift because of the typhoon." So we walked up and carried boxes up 5 flights of stairs. It was that was a lot of work. Yeah.
It's your exercise.
But we got it done.
Charles.
We got it done. But the process of doing a major clean out like that was actually really, really, really phenomenal. And since then, as we've been, unpacking boxes and sorting ourselves out in our new flat, we're finding things that we have been asking ourselves, we asked ourselves this question before we moved, how often do we use this item? And then now that we moved into the new flat, where there's a little bit less storage than in our old flat, we're asking ourselves the same question: how often do we need this item, and is it better served somewhere else? And we've been giving away a lot of stuff to churches and to the Salvation Army because we realize we don't need things. And professional organizers will tell you that if you don't touch something for 2 years, especially a piece of clothing, you should probably get rid of it and pass it on to someone else. So elimination is something to think about. And new environments, obviously travel, in which Joanne and Damien, we will have had the great experience of tremendous, diverse travel in Asia, because Hong Kong is so close to so many different amazing countries with different cultures. So that's another way to immerse oneself into different perspectives. And then the last thing I'll say here before I open it up for the two of you to share, actually, I think I might just hand this one over to you, Joanne, is seeking perspective and feedback. So how would actively asking for feedback on how one shows up in the world help to reveal blind spots? Why could that be a good exercise, Joanne, in personal transformation?
Well, how many people do it, to be honest? Unless you're a manager maybe and are able to or privileged enough to be given like a 360 assessment, which, by the way, many managers resist vehemently because, they can sometimes be a little bit wary of the results that they might get. But even just from a personal perspective, how often do we say to our friends, hey, I've got this going on in my life. I know we talked about it a little bit. I'd love some feedback from you on how I represented myself during that time, or, anything under those circumstances. I think to be open to how our behavior is being perceived is one of the key areas of personal transformation, because we can't always know the impact that we're having on other people unless we ask what that impact is. And the impact that we have can be far removed from the intent behind our behaviors or behind what we're trying to achieve. And I think it's always really important for us to have that curiosity and that openness to changing behavior, because if we don't ask, we don't know. And, going back to your earlier slides, what we don't know, that's one way of absolutely kind of finding that out. The key to that, though, I think, is being open to receiving the feedback or hearing things that we don't want to hear. Maybe some of that constructive feedback or that information that we're not anticipating can sometimes be a little bit tough to hear. But it all depends on our attitude and our mindset to it. If we see that information as information that will enable us to grow and be better human beings or better individuals, then that's a very different perspective than maybe taking it personally and maybe looking for blame or denying how another person might be seeing us. So I think it's key, especially to management and leadership, but definitely in terms of personal transformation.
I think that's a fantastic explanation of the power of that, Joanne. It's really excellent. Can you still hear me okay? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Yes?
Yes, I can
Okay,
hear you.
great. It blotted out temporarily, but it seems to be fine. I love that, Joanne, and actually I am a really big believer in perspective taking and seeking feedback. Although lately I have not done that, but I do have on my email, I have a short little pulse survey at the bottom of the email where if people want to give me feedback on any interaction, they can go in and click on the pulse survey and they rate me instantaneously.
But do they do that, Charles? I'm curious.
Yeah,
Out of many
they do it
people,
when
do
they're
you get?
upset.
Yeah.
That's really one thing. Going back to that point, you said, Joanne, about feedback. People don't always want to receive it. Sometimes people don't want to give it. And I think
That's right.
sometimes giving people permission to do it anonymously can be helpful. I had quite an interesting situation I had once. Somebody was said we look at legacy. They're looking about wanting to be the best parent they could be. And one thing we looked at is have they ever taken feedback from their children?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to be the best father you can be, have you ever asked your children feedback? And the children for that particular individual were, aged sort of 8 and 14. But that individual took feedback, and it not only gave them a massive confidence boost in that they're already a good father in terms of how their children perceived him, but also there were pointers and ideas that he hadn't even thought about before that made a massive difference in terms of how he showed up with his family. So whether it's in work or family or in any situation in life, the importance of 360 feedback is so powerful.
Yeah.
And very affirming when you get that positive feedback as well, Damien. I think that feedback has been stigmatized, and everyone thinks, well, it's going to be negative because people are looking at something as the glass is half full, as opposed to the glass, or no, the glass is half empty, as opposed to the glass could be half full, or the glass could be entirely full. Several years ago, maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, when I was toying around a lot with 360s, I actually came up with a customized community 360. And I had three major communities, in addition to doing a 360 in my work. We did the Corn Ferry 360 in my previous job, which was quite an involved and in-depth 360 tool, as you'll know, Joanne, because you are familiar with these tools, and Damien as well. But as I was reading through the report, I thought to myself, well, I wonder what the community thinks about all these issues. So I found a tool out there. It was a free tool, believe it or not, and I customized the tool. I created 3 versions of the survey, because the one thing you couldn't do in the free tool is you couldn't identify the different raters. And I sent it out to 3 different communities. So I had one was a community in Hong Kong called the Wak Timaeus community, which Damien's familiar with. It's sort of an intersection of international churches in Hong Kong. Another one was my church community. And then the third one was just sort of the general friend community in Hong Kong. And I got about 45 to 50 responses from collectively those 3 different communities. About 12 to 15 people responded in each one of the communities. And I got really, really good feedback it was affirming for me, and at the same time got really good feedback on how I show up for people in the community. But again, when I sent it out, I was like bracing for impact. I thought, uh-oh, here we go now. I get a notification that the first one's come in. It was all anonymous, but the notification came in that the first one had come in, and I thought, oh no, here we go. And I read it, and it was really positive.
There's a great model for folks if they want to learn how to give feedback effectively so that it does have a more positive impact at the end of the day, and that is the SBI model. It was created by the Center for Creative Leadership, and SBI stands for Situation, Behavior, and Impact. So you start off the conversation by talking about the situation. So, for example, during the live session tonight, and then the behavior was, Charles, I love the way that you share the conversation between, the 3 of us. The impact of that is that we get a much more variety in terms of the responses and perspectives that folks get to hear. But you say that as one sentence, and then you might turn to the person and say, and I would love to hear your thoughts. So it starts a conversation. It talks situation. It puts the person back into the situation where the behavior took place. It talks about the specific behavior that was engaged in, and then goes to that really important impact piece. And, it can take a little bit to practice that skill of giving feedback using SBI, but it's really powerful because it's data. The situation is data, the behavior is data, the impact is data at the end of the day. So it's much more receivable in that respect. So folks might like to look more into that if they're interested.
That's a great model. I love that model, Joanne, and it's much better than the sandwich model, which a lot of people use. Right?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan. I don't like
No.
the sandwich model at all, and I could talk to you about it for another half hour, but I won't. So use
Okay.
the SBI model instead. There you go.
Well, let's take a moment here to find out, to go through a couple of comments from people here, and then we'll jump into each one of you sharing some examples of personal transformation in your own lives. We've already heard from Dawn and Mike. We've also got Alex here from from Singapore. Welcome, Alex. Great to see you. And then we have, hello, Charles, Joanne, Damien, Hannah here. Really looking forward to being here today. Thanks, Hannah. I believe that's Hannah Buckland. So, Hannah, thanks for joining us. We have another individual here from Hong Kong, but we can't see the user. Andreas is joining us from the UK. Good morning from Norfolk Coast, UK. This looks interesting. Great topic. Thanks, Andreas. Wonderful that you're here. Andreas is an incredible photographer. Definitely go to his LinkedIn page and have a look at his content because he is a very, very good photographer. And also an all-around amazing individual. Sophie, calling in from China. Hi, Sophie. Thanks for joining us today. Leslie Flowers. I was suspicious that Leslie might be with us because this is a topic that's, I think, personal transformation is one that is near and dear to Leslie Flowers. And definitely watch her lives as well, where she's regularly talking about personal transformation and reviewing the book Think and Grow Rich. Leslie, Cybernetics. Yep, thanks for that. Hope. Calling in as well. Welcome, Hope. And then NK. Hi, everyone. Some technical, no voice. Oops. Yep. Sorry about that. Hope also mentioned, or NK also mentions here, talking about conscious versus subconscious mind. Yes, definitely. The bottom part of the iceberg model typically is living in the subconscious mind, and the top part of the iceberg model is above the water in the conscious mind. And then Julius also joining us. Welcome, Julius. Thanks for being with us today. So please share with us any ideas you have about personal transformation and or about getting outside of your comfort zone. And for sure, let us know if you have any questions. Feel free to ask us any questions that you have, and we will be happy to take them. So on that note, I want to hand it over to, or give Joanne and Damien an opportunity to talk about their experiences with personal transformation. And Joanne, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think my biggest transformation occurred when, which involved you, Charles, because we were working together at Juniper Networks, and I was invited to move, having already moved from Melbourne to Hong Kong for work. I was in Hong Kong for 3.5 years. And then I was invited by the same company to move to the United States. And I will be forever grateful for that opportunity. Yes, I worked very hard, obviously, to get there. But one of my main points here is there is no way that I could have had that personal transformation without people like Charles and another gentleman who has been on the Horizon X network with us before, Greg Pryor, who wrote the foreword to my book, which we've talked about before, Game On is Management, Your Best Career Play. And if it wasn't for those two individuals in my life, I don't know where I would be, to be honest. I doubt I would be in the United States, for one thing, settled here with a beautiful family, and living in the United States. So one of the tips that worked for me is recognizing I can't do it alone, and looking around me to yes, it's about my personal transformation, but there's also been a lot of other people in my life that have enabled me to become the person that I am today. And for those people, I will be eternally grateful. So my advice there is kind of look around you right now and see who is part of your personal transformation and the kind of relationships that you want to double down on, and maybe show some appreciation to those people right now for the impact that they've had on your life. The other thing that I try to talk to my direct reports about usually when I'm feeling that they're not feeling like they're progressing as quickly as they would like to think that they are or like to, is think of yourself now and think of yourself 6 months ago or even 3 months ago. I would hazard a guess that you're potentially a very different person under very different circumstances now compared to what you might have been even in that short period of time. So as much as you might not be having, exponential transformation, sometimes it's little bits make up a lot in a very short period of time. And the final piece before I hand over to Damien would be maybe check your assumptions a little bit more. And by that, I'll give you an example. my husband and I used to go to this same restaurant all the time. It was like every Thursday night we'd go out for dinner, and we would have dinner and we'd talk about our lives, our jobs, our kids, everything that was kind of going on in our lives. And it was like a date night, but it was a life date night. It wasn't just a date night. And we did that for, which was the same restaurant, well over 6 or 12 months. It was a long time that we were doing this, until he turned to me and he said, I don't think I like this restaurant anymore. And I'm like, I'm so glad you said that. The only reason I was coming to this restaurant was because I thought you loved it so much, and so we ended up changing restaurants. So even as something as simple as that, check your assumptions. And just because something is happening or has been happening in the same way for a long period of time doesn't necessarily mean it has to happen, that way. And maybe change is good. So.
That's a great example, Joanne. And another way that people can apply that is even driving to work.
Yes.
Try
Go different routes.
try a different
Mm-hmm.
route, or if you have a particular running route that you normally go on a different running route. There's just so many ways that you can do things differently to shake things up and change things up, even to the point where if people like to read magazines, they I've even heard people share how when you go to buy a magazine, pick up a magazine of a topic that you would not normally interest you and read it from cover to cover and see how you could learn something different.
Yeah, try new things too. One thing I often say in my training programs is just imagine if Elton John hadn't started twinkling at the old ivories, right? Playing the piano. What if, I'm showing my age here, what if John Lennon never picked up a guitar, right? These are legends in my mind in the world of music, which I love, obviously, from what you can see behind me. What if they never did that? And, you might be brilliant at that. You just haven't had an opportunity to be introduced to it. So try new things, as many
Great
new
idea.
things as you possibly can. Maybe one a week.
Great. Oh, one a week. I love that commitment.
One a week. There you
Outstanding.
go.
That's great. Great. Well, I know that you have participated in Landmark in the past, didn't you, Joanne?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So maybe what we'll do
Did.
is give Damien an opportunity to share, and then we'll come around to talking a little bit about Landmark. And also, we got Roger here from Nigeria. Welcome. NK says intuition. And Mike follows that on with trust your instincts. So he says here, trust your instincts. Is a massive one right now in my life. My heart says stay in Hong Kong and keep connecting as Hong Kong is the target long term. My brain says go back to Europe, take the top dollar offer on the table and stay closer to the family and come back to Hong Kong in the future. Sounds like you need a coach, Mike, to help you navigate that. Or at least a coffee. Mike, feel free to reach out to me and we can have a coffee before you do head back to Europe if you like. I think that that's a tough one because family is definitely important and family is going to be there for the long term. But I do believe that Hong Kong is well positioned, regardless of what's happening. Hong Kong is well positioned to be a very strong gateway in the future. NK also talks about here about personal and professional transformation links and even social too. So thank you for that, NK. So Damien, over to you. You are in a unique situation where you can share about your experiences being a monk and what that was all about.
It's very interesting you mention that because for many years I didn't tell anyone that I used to be a monk. So back in my 20s, I spent a year as a monk in a Catholic Christian monastery in the UK, and I decided it wasn't for me. And clearly, silence and celibacy wasn't my destiny. I'm now married and got 4 very young children at home, and it's very noisy. But I look back, and there were certain teachings I experienced there that did have a transformative impact on my life. And I think the daily discipline and some of the messages that kept being reinforced were very, very powerful. And so I'm less shy about mentioning the fact I used to be a monk now. And looking back all those many years ago, there are certain things that had a big impact on me. So, for example, we'd get up very early every day. So get up before dawn. And even now today, I do my best work early in the morning. maybe I probably need another coffee now, but still, getting up early and starting when my energy is highest, I think is really powerful. Something else though, and it's going to might sound culturally insensitive to some extent, or may sound counterintuitive, but something gives me great joy is a message that was repeated to us as monks almost daily. And whether somebody is a Catholic monk or Buddhist monk or different forms of monasticism, there's a big focus on mortality, the idea of memento mori. And so something that Benedict of Nursia, who wrote the foundational text of Christian monasticism, said is that monks should have death daily before their eyes. And so you would think the monks would therefore be very miserable, thinking they're going to die one day. Actually, no. That actually gives people an extraordinary sense of perspective. Gary Vaynerchuk, who words it in very different languages to Saint Benedict, talks about the great motivation of knowing that we are going to die one day, and it gives us long-term patience but short-term sense of urgency. And when I'm coaching people, looking at legacy, if you look, at the end of our lives, we look back, what do we wish we had done that we didn't? And also going back to what we said about elimination earlier, what do we wish we hadn't done that we did do? And then work back from there, and that could be very powerful.
Yeah, great idea. And there's actually a area of psychology called the illusion of permanence that human beings suffer from. And that is that while the world around us changes, the illusion of permanence would say that humans get tricked into a way of thinking that they are not changing, that the world around us is staying the same, or the world around us is changing, but that we are actually not changing. And it's very interesting, this illusion, the concept of the illusion of permanence. And you've somewhat touched on it there, because when you live your day as if it might be your last day, and some people are in situations, unfortunately, where they have a terminal illness and they realize that their last day might be 6 or 9 months away, and they live life differently compared to if they didn't have that illness. And it's very interesting, really make every day count. And we could have a whole, how can you make every single day count as if it's your last day? We could have a whole LinkedIn Live, a whole day discussion about that. But these sorts of concepts, the illusion of permanence, start to then get introduced through something like what you did when you were considering being a monk, Damien. These are the sorts of concepts that will also get introduced into personal development programs such as the Landmark Forum, where they'll look at very, very powerful concepts. And when you do a program like the Landmark Forum, I wouldn't say that it's major surgery, but it is high impact transformation that happens over a very, very short period of time. And Landmark has particularly finessed the art of personal transformation in a very short period of time. And I would say for sure, for a long time, the Landmark Forum was in the top 10 most impactful events of my life, until I then had triplets and got married and had Sebastian. And then it dropped down to maybe number 15 because the kids got the top spots, and Tess as well, getting married. But that is definitely a program, and it's also that's worthwhile, and it's also a program that has stuck with me for a long time. And as I've shared on other LinkedIn Lives, particularly Leslie Flowers, because she and I have talked about Landmark twice on 2 of her LinkedIn Lives. Landmark also licenses consultants to go into organizations to do work with leadership teams. And I have brought Landmark into I think almost every company that I've worked with, including Juniper, Joanne. So before you joined Juniper, in my first tour of duty at Juniper, at one of the QBRs back in the US just before the annual sales kickoff. We bolted the QBR onto the couple of days before the annual sales kickoff, and had Landmark come in and do some work with the senior leadership team in Asia.
Interesting.
And one of the people, curiously, who loved it the most, because it was a little bit controversial, because not everybody was catching on with it, and some people were pushing back. But one of the people that loved it the most was Sanders.
Oh, Sandra. Our
Yeah.
dear friend, who talk
Yeah.
about living life now. I mean, he passed away 5 months short of his 50th birthday back in December of 2023, and there was over 200 people at his funeral, and that was just at the church. And his passing actually changed my life. There was an element of transformation for me there, and it was very much to your point, Damien, that when someone that close to you, and I was very close with his kids and family, passes away, you can't help but feel about your own life and living your own life, almost because they didn't get a chance to. And I think of him daily, at least. So I'm not surprised by that at all, Charles. I can share with you. So I mentioned that I moved from Melbourne to Hong Kong. A friend of mine, just before I moved to Hong Kong, actually introduced me to Landmark. It was one of those weekend programs, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into, or what really the program was about. I just knew that I had so much change going on in my life, especially knowing that I was moving to Hong Kong by myself. I was freshly divorced. I just bought an apartment and had just graduated from a degree. I was ready for a lot of change, and I knew I was leaving behind a lot as well. And talk about intuition, NK, you mentioned that before. My intuition was telling me that I had to move away from Australia and Melbourne, because that was just the right thing that for my life that I needed to do, and that has subsequently proven myself correct. But I will never forget. I don't want to give away any of the secrets or anything associated with Landmark, Charles, because I don't want to take away from anyone else's experience. But one of them was a meditation, and there's a couple hundred people, I think, or at least 100 people in the room, and they're doing a guided meditation. We're all sitting there, and we've got our eyes closed. And at one point, probably 20 minutes into the meditation, we were very deep. And I wasn't a huge fan of meditation, by the way. I'd never really done a lot of that before. But I was in this meditation, and they said, I put my head back, and I swear, if you've ever seen that movie Green Mile, where you see kind of like black flies coming out of someone's mouth, I visualized that. And in that, I think I visualized, I don't know, disease or something. I don't know. I felt actually literally leaving my body. And that was obviously something that I needed to do, and let go of before I moved to Hong Kong. So I'm probably not describing it in a way that gives it enough of the depth and enough of the meaning that it actually had for me personally, but it was very, very powerful and a significant part of my personal transformation.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing that, Joanne. Yeah. And has that memory, has that lived with you as you've, carried forward? And
Absolutely. I wish I could I kind of wish I could get to that level of depth of meditation or feeling again and make it happen again, but it never has, even though I have tried. I just think it was one of those situations that was meant to happen at that particular point in my life for all the right reasons. So I will be very thankful to Landmark for creating that experience for me personally. But I do think about it a lot, even when I see a little black fly.
even when you see a little black fly. Yeah,
That's
it
a
is
really
quite,
powerful image.
yeah.
Sorry.
If you've seen the Green Mile, if you haven't seen the Green Mile, it probably doesn't mean a lot to you. But
Mm.
just imagine, hundreds of black things leaving your mouth. And if you haven't seen the Green Mile movie with Tom Hanks, please go watch it. It's fantastic, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is a very, very good film. Very, very impactful film. Absolutely. So as we come up to the remaining minutes here, would encourage people to share with us any ideas that they have about personal transformation and or any questions that they might have at the same time. Feel free to ask us any questions about anything that we've shared today, being a monk or participating in Landmark or any of the other ideas that we've shared about. I actually worked for Landmark for several years. Did you know that, Joanne?
I did. I
Okay.
did. Yes, you'd mentioned that before.
Yeah, I worked for Landmark for several years in Canada, and that was the training that I received at Landmark was just absolutely stellar. Just can't say enough about the level of support and training that I received as a facilitator, as a manager, as a leader at Landmark. It was absolutely outstanding and top notch and cutting edge training. And when I first participated in the what I actually did the communication course about 6 weeks before I did the Landmark Forum, and the communication course started to sort of chip away at my own iceberg that I had above the ground, above the waterline, and started loosening up the way that I listened to people. And believe it or not, I was running my own company at the time in Toronto. I had a marine business. And I had a very strong attitude that kind of made me a bit of a know it all when it came to my business. So when people tried to contribute ideas to me around how to run my business, I would push back against them. And I would have this whole argument about why I was the only person that knew how to run my business. And the reason for that was because I started the business when I was 16. And for many years, I felt that I had to justify lower prices because I had to sort of, at 16 years old when I first started the business, we needed to give customers a deal that they couldn't refuse because otherwise they would think, well, how do I know that as a 16-year-old I can entrust you with my yacht here? And are you going to look after my yacht? Are you going to take care of it and not ruin it? Well, that sort of conversation, that filter that I had about running the business stuck with me for 6 or 7 or 8 years. And when I did the Landmark Forum, I recognized that that filter was in place and that when people were giving me ideas, including my accountant, my dad, and one of my customers, I remember one of my top customers gave me a check one day, which was one of the largest checks we ever received for any project we did in the life of the company, which was about 14 years long. And as he gave me the check, he said, "That's a lot of money." And I said, "I know." And he said, "And you could be charging a lot more." And I was totally blown away. And I ran back to our office and I said to my right-hand sort of assistant general manager, I said to him, "You wouldn't believe what so-and-so just said to me. He gave me the check and he said I should be charging more." And he says, "We've been telling you that all along."
That's funny.
Now, it was hard for me to hear that, but when I did the Landmark Forum, I was actually able to hear it. And then I also recognized that when my dad cut out articles from newspapers or from magazines on how to run a small business and gave them to me, he wasn't giving it to me because he was criticizing me. He was giving it to me because he wanted to contribute to me and because he loved me. And he wanted me to be successful and have a successful small business. But I couldn't see that at the time. And when my accountant said, "Well, here's the model you should be following for your pricing," I couldn't hear it at the time. Instead, the filter in my head was, "Well, you don't understand my business. I have to justify the low prices because we're just a bunch of high school students looking after boats here." But actually, in reality, we were offering a very, very good service. So this all got unveiled in the Landmark Forum, along with lots of personal stuff. I'm focusing on the commercial, professional stuff, but lots of personal stuff. I would say this, if you had said to me that I would have 25,000 followers on this thing called LinkedIn before I did the Landmark Forum, and that I would be running LinkedIn Lives once a week, I would have said, that's impossible. because my whole thing going into Landmark was I was a very lonely person. I was extremely introverted and I was isolated. My vent was actually journaling. And I had this wild and crazy concept about wisdom beyond your years. And for every journal that I wrote represented 1 year of my life. And when I did the Landmark Forum, I think I'd written 2 journals more than the entire number of years I had lived. And I was constantly journaling. And I've kept all my journals. I don't read them a lot because some of them are a little bit depressing, but it was all about being alone. And when I went through Landmark, I recognized I'm actually not alone. It's a little bit to your point, Joanne. You have community, right? We have people around us
Yes.
supporting us. I couldn't see that. And out of Landmark, I was able to see that. And the other thing is the ideas stick with you for a long time. And we used to say I was a leader. I led a lot of programs at Landmark. I never led the Landmark Forum. I once had a privilege of leading a portion of the advanced course, which was phenomenal. But it was just a small portion of it, and then led the evening course with the evening session with the Landmark Forum leader on that Tuesday night. But I remember one of the things that we used to say to people in our programs is to look after their well-being because the conversation will go to work on you. And what we meant by that was you're going to be driving down the highway thinking about the course you did a month and a half ago, and suddenly you're going to have an insight. And you'll have another insight. And even 30 years later, you're going to have an insight. So it's a very, very powerful program. So that's one example. You can go be a monk for how long were you a monk, Damien?
Just over a year.
You can be a monk for just over a year, and you can also go to Landmark in 3 days.
I think one thing, Charles, that's coming to mind from what you were saying too, is I think we need to be very conscious of our self-talk. And if we are not conscious of our self-talk, I think that's maybe some subconscious ill play can happen behind the scenes. So if we are hearing ourselves saying something particularly, repeatedly, there is an opportunity for us to question ourselves. And we might feel like we're crazy to begin with, but just because we're thinking something doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And I think a lot of self-talk can get in the way of personal transformation. And I wouldn't like that to happen to anybody who might be listening to this. So being a little bit more conscious and just changing the way we are talking to ourselves, treat ourselves as we would treat our friends, not our enemies, as so many of us do. So,
Absolutely. And I would add to that, whatever is coming out of your mouth is the future you're inventing.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Positive self-talk and whatever is coming out of your mouth is the future inventing. One habit that I have implemented is every night when I'm falling asleep, instead of counting sheep, not that I ever did that, but I count things I'm grateful for.
Yes.
So I just think,
do the
okay, what
same.
happened today that I'm grateful for? And
Yes.
and fall asleep on that tone. Great insights, Joanne, from Zilli Huma Niazi, and also Andreas loves the movie The Green Mile and how the prison guards were transformed. And thank you, MJC. Instinct from NK. Instinct and gut feeling are the same. Self-judge. And Mike says here, my personal transformation happened when I was around 10 and moved to middle school. Up until then, I was a very shy child, and then suddenly anything I suggested to do, children would listen and follow me. That was my first step into leadership. That's fantastic. Great share, Mike. Thanks for sharing that with us. For me, one of the things that happened was running. So I went to schools that were super athletic in terms of football, like American Canadian football, and rugby, and things like that. And I was not good at any of those things. I was also a relatively skinny kid. but one summer I discovered that I could run. And I remember my PE teacher said that one year I wouldn't run, or if I ran, I came in the back of the pack, and I came back 2 months later in September, and they never saw me again because I was always running out in front. And then I went on, and that was what got me into running, and that was a big transformation for me. So an example of physical transformation. And then I started a track career and everything else with that. Final comments before we close out. Damien, final comments?
My final comment would be, look at your legacy. If today was going to be the last day of your life, what do you wish you hadn't done, and ruthlessly eliminate it? Is there something in your life holding you back from what you need to do? Discover what that is by thinking about your legacy and cut that out of your life. And I think sometimes getting feedback from other people could be a very important step in finding out what that is.
Outstanding. Thank you for that, Damien. Thank you. And Joanne, final comment?
What's coming up for me, Charles, is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That, we've all experienced, we've all had wonderful experiences. Some of us have had, more challenging experiences, but they all make us who we are. And appreciation of the great and understanding of the not so great. Who knows what we might become when we start looking at ourselves a little bit more holistically, rather than every single little piece of ourselves that's made up our lives. While we appreciate them at the same time, because we wouldn't be where we are or who we are without all of those experiences and the decisions in life that we've made to get us to where we are right now.
Great feedback. Great feedback on top of positive self-talk and be mindful of what's going on inside your head. We have one final comment here, and that is thank you so much. Really great takeaways for me. I love the idea of asking your community for feedback. We tend to be in community with people similar to ourselves, so how do you ensure you get some input from people who we wouldn't normally gravitate towards in our personal life? Yep. How do we get input from people who we wouldn't normally gravitate towards in our personal life? How would we do that as a final answer for this individual?
I think anticipate positive responses or anticipate positive outcomes or anticipate positive surprises that might come from other people in our lives, rather than maybe entering the circumstance or situation with a fear of something that might be negative. Just expect positivity.
Yeah,
I
and the
love
other
that.
thing, yeah, Damien?
So I was going to say, I love that thing about expect positivity, but I would also reframe to expect positivity even in criticism. If somebody
Yes.
gives you negative feedback, be grateful for that and to see that as positive. I once asked a lot of people feedback on me, and Charles Caldwell actually gave me my weakness and said, Damien, you play too small. He said, you're capable of much more, but haven't had the courage to go after it yet. And that weakness, he told me, I was very grateful for that. It really, transformed my perspective in so many ways. So I think that take any criticism as a gift as well and see that as positive.
Absolutely. And the other thing is to paint the context. So if there's someone that you wouldn't normally gravitate towards in your personal life, invite them out for a coffee and just ask them. Tell them I'm doing a project where I'm getting some perspective taking and I'm, trying to get feedback on my life, and we may or may not know each other that well, but based on your interactions with me, tell me something you would like to see me keep doing, something you'd like to see me change doing, and something you'd like to see me stop doing. And each piece of that feedback is a gift. So actually, if people click on the link in my Gmail, one of the questions I get is a stop, change, start question. What should Charles stop? What should he change? What should he start doing? So on that note, I think we're well past the hour, and thank you very much, Joanne and Damien, for joining me today for this amazing conversation. and I'm excited to keep it going. But in the meantime, it's after 2 p.m., so it's time to say goodbye from Hong Kong. Thank you again, Damien and Joanne. And remember, everybody, whatever is coming out of your mouth is the future you're inventing. And in the meantime, good vibes only. Inside your head, outside your head, good vibes only. Have a great day. This is Hong Kong, Horizon X, over and out.